Sad news, ladies and gentlemen, the Attack on Titan Ending Trilogy video series, which my Scout video is meant to be the first part in, has effectively been cancelled. I know, dry your tears, don't cry, it's alright. If you're an astute viewer, you might have noticed that I removed any mention of the so-called Ending Trilogy from the title of my Scout video a few months ago. How crafty. I've decided to cancel that video series because how it was originally planned to continue doesn't make much sense contemporaneously. The Ending Trilogy was supposed to be a video series on Attack on Titan's ending, and all adjacent noteworthy topics. All-encompassing, I think I described it as in my first video. The problem is, chat, I don't think I understand Attack on Titan or its ending enough to make an all-encompassing video on its ending, which is what the second video in that ending series was largely supposed to be. The first video was all about the Scout's core principle being understanding, which is still a point I like a whole hell of a lot, and the clothing point in the video I especially like. But all of that doesn't gently lead into a discussion of the final chapter or the ending really at all, which again the second video was supposed to be all about. Understanding sure is a theme iterated upon in the final chapter, and it's a thematic linchpin throughout the series, but the one Scout moment from the final chapter, Levi's final salute, isn't connected to understanding at all. So while I still like that video as a standalone video, it doesn't really work as the first part in a video series about the ending. And structurally, I've kind of written myself into a corner with that first video. The videos in the trilogy were all shaping up to be disconnected. The first about what it meant to be a Scout and introducing understanding, only for the second video to barely mention it and focus on talking positively about a bunch of other miscellaneous aspects of the ending, and then for a third video to not even really be about Attack on Titan, which was what was planned, but to be a general discussion about how art is talked about in our circles, and my issues with it, just wasn't gonna work. This all made the series structurally a nightmare of disconnected individual points. This, along with the fact that I don't think I will be properly confident in my personal read and understanding of the series until a proper reread is done, has led me to deciding that the Ending Trilogy was not the way to go moving forward with Attack on Titan content on this channel, for my sake and yours. I think for a long time I wanted to make the Ending Trilogy pre-reread, as I said in the Scout video, to capture a snapshot of my thoughts on the series in time, somewhat close to when the ending actually happened. But that seems wholly redundant now if you look over at a calendar. It's been over a year since the series ended, that idea was outdated months and months ago. Plus I don't think I was hungry for a reread back then, which is not a problem now. I'm very excited to jump into Attack on Titan again from the beginning and untangle this behemoth as I try to figure out all the things there are to figure out in Attack on Titan. So the reread is happening, and not only will I be getting content ideas out of it, I will be making the reread itself content too. Elite RE and Riker 7 will also be rereading the series with me as we put out podcast-like content on all of our second channels as we go arc by arc, cleverly rotating the uploads so you have to subscribe to all of us to keep up. Links as always are in the description. These will be incredibly long, girthy, in-depth discussions, as I can attest to as we've already started recording the first episode, covering all the introductory arcs from chapter 1 to chapter 18. I highly encourage you all to read along with us and give your input in the comment sections of those eventual videos. We can make this a community reread if willing. To reiterate, the ending videos in the form they were promised have been cancelled, but hopefully this will make way for more and better Attack on Titan content coming down the line, especially pertaining to the ending, as I figure it out more and more. So please look forward to it all. This is not, however, where today's video ends. The disclaimer at the beginning of the video didn't lie. This is not just an update video. Now is where the updating ends. I'm going to now go through all the points I was going to make in that second Ending Trilogy video about the final chapter, and make an abridged version of the video that could have been. So buckle up. So let's start by reiterating briefly what exactly transpired in Attack on Titan chapter 139 and that dastardly ending. It opens with basically the blow-off to Attack on Titan's biggest mystery come the final arc, as we finally get insight into what Eren was thinking and what his plan was all this time. This is done through a tell-all, heart-to-heart conversation with Armin, Eren slowly morphing from the stoic, emotionless shell of his former self he's been for the last 50 chapters into the character we once knew, emotional and confused, trying to do what he perceived was the right thing for the people he cared about, with a depressed rage simmering underneath. We finally see the cracks in the false exterior. Eren explains that 80% of the world's population will be gone, Paradis will have the strongest position on the world stage, and that all his friends should get happy endings, wink wink nudge nudge, while also insinuating that this wasn't all just calculated out of the goodness of his heart, but that he's somewhat confused and messed up by the Founder's power, and that the capability to lash out at the world in this manner with the rumbling has always been inside him. Armin and Eren then hold hands a little bit, how cute. Then they talk about Mikasa for a bit and Eren lets it all out, how cute. And then Armin thanks Eren for becoming a mass murderer for their sake, and that he won't let this terrible mistake go to waste. Then they cuddle, and the scene ends. How cute. This is all accompanied by nice imagery of the idealized sights he and Armin dreamed about seeing as kids, frozen water and burning earth, etc. They also age as they go, how nifty. Oh, and there's also some confusing talk about Mikasa's choice and how it affects Ymir. That's one of those things I'm still trying to figure out. Overall, a great scene. Then we see that everybody seemingly has been clued in by Eren at this point in their own heart-to-heart conversations with him, and we cut to everybody individually very thankful to Eren for what he's done for them personally, and that they're all sad that he's dead. Everyone then reunites with the people they care about and gets some closure. Gabby and Falco, Reiner and his mother, Annie and her father, Levi saluting the dead scouts and crying, etc. Mikasa and Armin cry together over Eren's severed head, and Mikasa decides to go back to Paradis ahead of the group, has a little bonus talk with Ymir as she fades away forever content. Try and figure that one out. And then Armin confronts the remnants of Mali's military and convinces them that the Paradisians are able to be trusted. We then get the traditional end of arc narrator wrap-up. For the last time ever, how sad. First, it seems to confirm that Historia did indeed just get pregnant by some random farmhand. Her baby, 3 years on, looks very happy. No word on if she named it Ymir though. We then see Paradis has gone full fascism, or has it? And we see the Alliance 3 years on returning to Paradis for the first time to hopefully negotiate a peace deal through the connections they still have on the island. Then for the final scene, we cut to Mikasa depressed at Eren's grave, only to have her scarf tugged on by a miscellaneous unimportant bird, which gives her a new lease on life, and the ability to move on, as we see in the bonus pages. Which of course we are also talking about in this video. In the bonus pages, we first see the rest of Mikasa's life in quick succession, her seemingly coming to Eren's grave periodically throughout the rest of her life, first accompanied by what looks to be Jean and their child, then sometime later with her and Jean's extended lineage, before she dies peacefully of old age, living the life Eren hoped for her. Then we see Paradis being bombed by a foreign power, probably at least 100 years after Mikasa's death. The whole city's been renovated, and I assume that takes a long time. Before seeing the entire city and presumably island abandoned and destroyed after another long period, because I assume nature taking over a formerly populous city takes a long time also. Only for some kid to show up and find the tree, as a callback to Ymir first stumbling into the Titan powers. How mysterious. Ambiguity in action, perhaps. More on exactly what I make of that later. And that's our recap done. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. One of the more interesting aspects of the fallout of the ending was that it seemed to piss everybody off in the hardcore Attack on Titan community. All the heavily divided subsections of the community that had been at each other's throats for the last few years of the series' run seemed to all come together in their dislike for the ending, albeit for different, sometimes opposite reasons. Now that's what I call coming together against a larger foe. The Jaegerists and anti-Jaegerists alike, the pro-Rumbling people and the anti-Rumbling people alike, the Mikasa x Eren shippers and the Eren x Historia shippers alike. The ending seemed to be maddening for everyone. The Jaegerists and pro-Rumbling crowd didn't like the ending because Eren didn't win and he betrayed them. He wasn't actually this stoic badass for my people bloke in the end that they had been projecting onto and worshipping this entire time. Instead, he's simping out and cuddling with Armin and being an actual person and a rounded character. The anti-Jaegerist and anti-Rumbling crowd were upset that the last chapter focused too much on humanizing Eren, the genocidal maniac, and were mad at Armin seemingly for thanking Eren for the rumbling, the genocidal act. The sinking feeling in their stomach that the fascism accusations were going to come double time now from uninformed bread tubers took over, and they lost all wit. The Eren x Historia shippers certainly weren't happy, farmhand supremacy, and even the Mikasa x Eren shippers who got their ship confirmed got cucked because Eren died and Mikasa kinda killed him, and then ended up with Jean. As I pointed out, was implied in the scene of the alliance on the boat, before the bonus pages were even released. Go back and watch the chapter review. Just thought I'd remind you all that I'm a predictive god. Even the Armin x Annie shippers didn't get outright confirmation of their ship. It was not a good time to be a shipper, it seems. There were also other things about the ending that were always going to generally piss some people off. The ambiguity in the fact that we are kind of left on a cliffhanger on whether or not the scouts will succeed in the end in finding a peaceful solution to the conflict is probably not enough closure for some people, and the bonus pages only take that ambiguity even further. The quaint cuteness of the ending, as I pointed out in my masterful recap, with the cuddling and the crying, was always going to piss off the worst and most toxic segment of the Attack on Titan community. No, not the Jaegerists or the Rumbling defenders, but the dude bro Attack on Titan GOAT crowd, whose entire personality seemingly revolves around Attack on Titan being widely considered the best anime/manga, and better than other usually popular anime and manga. Bro, you like Naruto? Why don't you watch something good like Attack on Titan? You've seen them around. I think in a lot of cases what the ending actually was inconvenient to all these subsections of the hardcore community, who had been arguing sides of these issues for years. And when you dedicate years of your life to fighting about these things online, and then aren't validated in the end, that's a hell of a gut punch. And that frustration has to go somewhere. So the ending was bad, and Isayama fell off. And what's worse is that with a clear head looking back, the ending was always going to look like this. Of course Eren wasn't going to be validated morally for the rumbling, but of course he was going to be humanized in the end. I think a lot of these people lost sight in the series in their arguing, and didn't realize it and just wanted an ending that would validate them and their online arguments about the series. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a big proponent of subjectivity and interpretation in art. You can like or dislike something for literally any reason, and I think it's completely valid and as valid as any other reason. I'm simply describing what I think happened and why I think everybody was rather mad about the ending, and why ultimately that's unfortunate. I was clearly an anti-Jaegerist, anti-Rumbling argumentarian back in the day, but I like to think I could still engage with media without purely seeking personal validation for my worldview from the final events of the story. The series itself, I think, became secondary to moral crusading internet arguments about crypto-fascists, or a person's duty to nation and their people or whatever the fuck, and I think it all got a little out of hand. That's at least where I think a lot of the controversy is derived from. An incredibly toxic, at each other's throats fan base, which didn't find any validation in the ending. Not like there aren't other reasons to dislike the ending. We'll talk about complaints about Bird Eren later, and I'm not saying that everyone that dislikes the ending falls into any of these camps, but it's definitely a trend I noticed, and is what I think largely happened in the more hardcore subsections of the community. But let's stop talking about the controversy or what other people thought or didn't like about the ending, and talk about what I liked about it, if I'm such a fan. Spoiler alert, I basically liked or have come to like all the things that people in these communities were mad at. I think it's apt that we start my substantive talk about what I liked about the ending by going over how understanding is represented thematically in the final chapter and the ending of Attack on Titan. Because despite what I said in the introduction to this video, it is still prevalent in some aspects of the ending, even if I think a different theme, which obviously we will also get into, is the larger main theme regarding the final chapter and the ending. A major point I made in my Scout video was about the Scout flag, the Wings of Freedom, being an extension and truthfully symbolic of everything it meant to be a Scout, and understanding and the such. The final chapter plays into this by having the growingly fascistic, militant, and intolerant Paradisian military, in the Scouts' absence, abandon the traditional Scout flag, replacing it with this new Paradisian military flag. The wings of freedom now buried in the background by firearms, weapons meant for combat and not understanding. This obviously reflects them losing their way and abandoning the scout principles. The people who make up this new military seem to scream out for further violence at the end of the chapter, which would seemingly indicate on an initial viewing that Armin and the remaining scouts' ambition of parleying with Historia and the military for a peaceful solution to this conflict, something that is left somewhat ambiguous by the ending, is doomed to fail, proving understanding ineffective and undercutting understanding as a theme. But that doesn't seem to be the case upon closer inspection. We see several characters that we have come to know throughout the story who remain on Paradis, noticeably rejecting the methods and rhetoric of the new Paradisian military here, knowing understanding, not further violence, to be the solution to this problem. We see Flagle and the reporters from the Uprising arc look on unimpressed, as the people around them mindlessly salute. Notice that the salute has also changed. It's no longer the traditional scout salute. We see Sasha's family and Niccolo walk through the people unimpressed also. We see Hitch yawning while giving a half-assed salute, showing her lack of commitment to this new military. She's also right up front, indicating that she's in a high-ranking position in this new military, meaning that the higher-ups in this new military might also not be entirely down with the display here, and might be amenable to Armin and the Scouts' peaceful ambitions. They still have friends in the military. This is only further reinforced by the fella front and center, seemingly the leader of this new military, and the speech giver here. Do you recognize him? That's the fella I used to lovingly refer to on stream as Glasses Guy. Apparently his name is Surma? And you might not have recognized him on your first time through the chapter. Shame on you. His prominence here is important because he was told by Shardis, in a scene you also might not recall, after offering his loyalty to Shardis, before Shardis leaves to die with Magath and assist the scouts, to not oppose the Jaegers faction remaining on Paradis, but to infiltrate them, and someday make his move, which he seems to have done to massive success here. This all combined with the fact that Historia is obviously another old friend of Armin and the remaining scouts, and somebody who can be reasoned with, leads me to believe that a peaceful negotiation and an understanding between the scouts and Paradis was certainly possible in the aftermath of the final chapter, reinforcing understanding thematically as a positive solution to this and every conflict. That's my view of how understanding factors into the wider, grander themes of Attack on Titan as represented in the final chapter. But I also want to talk about understanding on a more interpersonal level thematically in the final chapter. So let's talk about interpersonal understanding first in the Armin and Eren opening conversation of the chapter, and then talk a hell of a lot about interpersonal understanding in the final scene of the chapter, with Mikasa and yes, Bird Eren.
Da, 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 da. Da 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 da.
The Eren and Armin opening scene from the chapter is from a character standpoint entirely about Armin and Eren interpersonally understanding each other and getting on the same page after they spent the last nearly 50 chapters of the series on wholly different pages. This is Armin's first insight into Eren's mindset and reasoning for the entire final arc, and through their dialogue here, Armin and the audience are finally able to understand Eren's personal indiscretions against him and Mikasa in chapter 112, which we spend a lot of time on here, as the last chapter personalizes at every opportunity, and his genocidal indiscretions against the world also. Remember that whole rumbling thing? Eren explains here that his motivation was to actualize the best perceivable outcomes for all of his friends, the people he cares most about in this world, as teased with the railway scene back in chapter 108, even if it means sacrificing and martyring himself. This is, of course, a motivation Armin can relate to and understand, since he's done the exact same thing in the past, though through a drastically different method with drastically different moral implications. Besides getting on the same page, this scene is also about discovering that the Eren Armin used to know and love, the Eren from pre-time skip, is not completely lost in the self-admitted clusterfuck that Eren describes his mind as. The awkward incel Eren moment, the holding hands and cuddling, the resigning himself to the possibility that he might have done the rumbling because of his innate anger anger and lust for vengeance. These are all very old Eren things to do, say, and think. It's in finding out that the old Eren is still in there that helps Armin trust and understand Eren in this scene. They leave each other embracing, and with some closure regarding their journey together and their friendship, with a mutual understanding of Eren's actions and motivations, albeit still in disagreement about Eren's methods and his terrible mistake.
Da 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 da.
At no point in the entire series would I describe Eren and Mikasa as having a mutual interpersonal understanding of each other, that is, until this final scene. But to understand that understanding, I'm just being difficult at this point, we first have to understand, please make it stop, their history of misunderstanding each other. Got it? This is how Eren and Mikasa's relationship misunderstandings usually went. Mikasa would be incredibly indirect and hesitant, and Eren would be normal levels of main shonen protagonist oblivious to the girl that clearly likes him, leading to debauchery and no progress. They almost had a breakthrough in chapter 50 when Mikasa thought it was literally do or die, or I guess do and die. May as well do if you're gonna die. But then Eren fucked it up and saved them from imminent death instead. They also, of course, nearly had a breakthrough in chapter 123, when Eren unconceivably, untactfully, and bluntly just straight up asked Mikasa what he was to her. She hesitated again in that moment before they were interrupted. And once again, no progress was made. There's a lot of miscommunication and not being on the same page going on here. Even in their paths alternative fantasy in chapter 138, where they have run away together resulting from Mikasa not hesitating in that moment and Eren reciprocating her feelings, Eren still does not have an understanding of Mikasa's feelings, and really isn't trying to. Instead, he's selfishly playing martyr, telling Mikasa that she should throw away the scarf when he dies soon after his 13 years are up, and forget about him and move on. Be free, he pleads with her, misunderstanding her and not thinking from her position or about her feelings as the person in this relationship that isn't dying, who doesn't get a release from her feelings through death. In the climactic pages of chapter 138, following this plea from Eren, Mikasa rejects his words. She denies him and wraps the scarf back around herself, not in character regression, but in committing to never forget him and knowing that his memory will live on with her. And like back in chapter 7, she is given the strength to fight and delivers the final blow to Eren, winning the Battle of Heaven and Earth for the Scouts. Mikasa cannot just forget about Eren, she cannot just throw the scarf away. From an emotional standpoint, this is obviously impossible, and misunderstands from Eren's perspective Mikasa's feelings, and what dealing with grief is like, which he should know a thing or two about. People will tell their families as they are dying not to be sad for them after they go, or urge them to move on as Eren does with Mikasa, but this is some deathbed privilege shit. Easy for you to say, pal, you don't have to deal with the emotional aftermath, you'll be dead. With them having now come to an interpersonal understanding about their love for each other, this is the last misunderstanding that needs to be rectified in their relationship. Eren properly understanding Mikasa's perspective. And it is in this final scene, through the act of a miscellaneous bird, that this interpersonal understanding is achieved. In the final scene of this chapter, we see Mikasa still reeling from this final interpersonal misunderstanding. We see her dealing with the emotional aftermath of Eren's death rather poorly. It's been 3 years, all her friends are yet to return to the island, she's alone. And it seems all she's been doing is visiting Eren's grave and moping around, being depressed about it all. She breaks down in tears under the tree on the hill, looking out over a wall-less Shiganshina horizon, reflecting on him not being with her to see it, commenting that she misses him so much. She hasn't gotten over Eren at all, his plea to her left unfollowed. And then something controversial happens. And to understand why I like it, we have to look back at the last time Mikasa lost her family and was alone, back in her flashback in chapter 6, and the moment Mikasa was originally given the scarf by Eren. I just revisited this moment for the reread I was shilling back at the beginning of the video, so it's fresh in my mind. After Eren and Mikasa killed the would-be sex traffickers who killed Mikasa's entire family, she asks Dr. Jaeger where she should go from here. She comments that it's cold and that there's no place for her to go home to anymore. And in that moment, Eren wraps the scarf around Mikasa for the very first time. Mikasa was cold on two levels, first literally, as their breaths are showing in this scene, but also on a second level. The cruel world is cold. It has left her out in the cold. It's taken her family from her and everything she ever knew. Eren giving her the scarf comforts her from the cold in two ways. First, literally, a scarf keeps a person warm, that's what it's designed to do, but also on a second level it shows the warmth of humanity and of kindness. Eren is taking her in here, giving her a new family and a place to go home to. Grisha immediately after this offers for Mikasa to come and live with their family in Shiganshina. Mikasa in this moment, still stricken with trauma and grief, and the suddenness in which her life has been destroyed, hesitates. She's not ready to move on yet. But then Eren tugs on her scarf, urging her to come with them, guiding her to move forward. Mikasa accepts the offer, agreeing to go home, and cries. The scarf awkwardly and cutely, unevenly wrapped around her. She allows herself to move on. She allows herself to move into the next chapter of her life in this moment. Not by forgetting the past and throwing it away, but in an attempt to move towards happiness, which is something she is successful in finding with Eren in her second family. Cut back to the final scene in chapter 139, and Mikasa is in the same position again. Her nightmare has repeated. Her second family is now entirely dead. Carla, Grisha, and now Eren. She is lost again. She can't move on healthily until Eren tugs on her scarf and encourages her to move on one last time. Not by abandoning the scarf and forgetting about him, like he had pointlessly and selfishly urged in chapter 138, but by remembering and carrying his memory with her as she attempts to move forward and be happy again. The final scene in chapter 138 is a callback to the original scarf moment, to Eren tugging on the scarf and helping Mikasa begin the process of moving on. That was the inciting moment for Mikasa and Eren's relationship, and it is here again for their last moment, evoking all the same emotions in a wonderful payoff. To end the chapter, Mikasa watches the bird fly off to greener pastures, the afterlife or whatever, resolute, clutching her scarf, tears dry, thanking Eren one final time for wrapping the scarf around her and all that it represents. And sure enough, in the bonus pages we see Mikasa having moved on, having pushed forward, making a third family with Jean, having achieved happiness once again, having never given up. She seems to, even when she's older, have a giant extended loving family. And in Eren's memory and in remembrance of him, she continues to wear the scarf until she's buried in it, and she continues to periodically visit Eren's grave throughout her life. She moved forward as Eren pleaded for her to do, not by forgetting and throwing away the scarf, but by remembering and keeping it always a part of her, as his final action decreed. It is in this final moment that Eren and Mikasa have come to a mutual interpersonal understanding, where Eren understands Mikasa's perspective and feelings, and how to truly make her happy, by actually helping her move on, not with tragic martyrdom or a dramatic plea to be forgotten entirely, but in urging her to remember, to move forward without throwing away the past, to not forget, but to keep living her life with him always there, to be thankful that it happened and not sad because it's over. This is why I think the final scene is great, and why, quote, Bird Eren, as funny as it may be to cheaply make fun of out of context, rounds out Eren's character and Eren and Mikasa's relationship in the most satisfying way possible.
Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da.
So then, tough guy, seems like you've made a great case for understanding actually being the thematic core of the series. What's this nonsense about it actually not being that, huh? Well, this brings us to the most interesting part of the video. If understanding isn't the thematic core of the ending, then what is? Well, to answer that question, first I have to take you on a little detour, and admit that I was wrong about some things. The Attack on Titan ending was not as optimistic as I expected. Every month, month after month, in my last minute prediction videos and in my chapter review videos, I would preach that it was obvious that the Scouts were going to win, that Eren was going to lose, and that thematically the message of Attack on Titan was going to be that coming together and understanding each other was the way to save the world and end the cycle of hatred, etc. Chapter 127 ringing in my mind. I was so very confident. I seem to think everything was perfectly building up to that, but this was not what eventuated. And though, as I've demonstrated throughout this video and my previous Scout video, I still believe understanding to be a stable part of Attack on Titan thematically, there are some aspects of the ending that would seem to contradict it being the thematic core of the series. Even though the Scouts did win, and they did beat Eren, it was kind of orchestrated somewhat by Eren, and the ending wasn't as damning on Eren, as we've already gone over, as much as I had expected. And it turns out whether or not the conflict was fully resolved in the end by our characters clad in Scout understanding is left ambiguous. Did Historia and Armin negotiate peace, or did negotiations fall apart and further an immediate war break out? It seems for the remainder of Mikasa's life that Paradis remained peaceful, per the bonus pages, so we can assume that the characters we've come to know and love led peaceful rests of their lives. And I went over earlier how I thought moles in the new Paradisian military would lead Armin and the Scouts to being successful, but even that granted, due to the bonus pages we know that understanding did not lead the world to everlasting harmony and peace. Ruin does eventually come for Paradis. The island reclaimed by nature post-destruction was not the optimism I was anticipating. We also have the final 2 pages that hint at the potential cyclical nature of this conflict, as the kid, clearly calling back to the moment Ymir first made contact with the Titan tree, approaches Eren's grave, potentially to bring Titan powers back into the world. That doesn't sound like the ending of the cycle at all. It seems the implication here is that this is all a never-ending cyclical cycle of violence that the Attack on Titan world, not unlike our own, is perpetually stuck in and never learns its way out of. Even if short-term understandings can be met and temporary peaces can be achieved. The optimistic ending I anticipated would have been a hopeful one that doesn't necessarily reflect reality, but hopes to usher in a better one through Scout understanding. And this potential new message I'm describing would be one of a more cynical nature, highlighting humanity's never-ending hatred for itself and for others, which might be truer to life. Which is also funny because historically I used to fight back against the notion that Attack on Titan had this underlining biting cynicism to it. That it was so dark, that it killed characters all the time, that there was no good or bad in Attack on Titan. Now, Attack on Titan might not be the darkest story I've ever seen, and it might not kill off characters as often as its reputation might imply, and there certainly is good and bad in Attack on Titan. But I think it does have an underlining, biting cynicism to it after all. But I think this underlining, biting cynicism is descriptive, not prescriptive, in the way of its message. I don't think the point of Attack on Titan is to cynically point out how bad the world is, or how bad humanity is, or that violence is a cycle and that Daenerys' wheel is unbreakable. I think Attack on Titan's prescription, its thematic core, its message, is that you ought to make the best out of a bad situation. The bad situation we're all born into, life. On understanding, I think the message is still clear, that even if an understanding between people is only temporarily achieved, it is still something that ought to be strived for a temporary peace is better than no peace at all, and is making the best of a bad situation. Of course, a forever understanding that eliminates war and conflict and strife from the world will never be achieved, but still you have to make the best of that sad reality. The kid rocking up at the tree on the final page might in the end be cursed with the power of the Titans. But if the kid makes the best of that potential bad situation, as I think some aspects of him might indicate, he could use that Titan power to do some good. We heard the fabled positive tales of Ymir that Grisha repeated to his compatriots. It's entirely possible that the Titan powers could be used for good by good people. Hounds chased Ymir into the tree as she was pursued by a hunting party through Sasha's father's dastardly forest, marked by death by her eventual husband. But this fella has his trusty, friendly dog beside him. He's not being chased relentlessly, marked for death, and he seems equipped to deal with the forest, and is seemingly not under the thumb of any notable tyrants. I don't think necessarily that the last page implies that the suffering is going to start all over again, and that the cycle will continue anew here and forever into the future. I think it implies that this is a new opportunity, in a new context, to correct Ymir's mistake, and try to make the best of a bad situation. It's humanity's choice. He's surrounded by his predecessor's mistakes. It's his situation to navigate. It's up to him what he does with this potential power. And I think what's implied by these parallels is that he might just make the best of it. The world is cruel, as Mikasa would say, yet sometimes beautiful. Terrible things happen to Mikasa over and over. She literally had 2 entire families taken away from her, most right in front of her eyes, and even some by her own hand. She was in some bad situations, but she made the most of them and continued to strive towards being happy. And what else are you left to do in life? Attack on Titan, I think, is saying that terrible things have happened and will continue to happen that are completely out of your control. There is no God or ultimate salvation to run away to, or underlying justice waiting for us in the end. Perceived deities just end up being as broken as the rest of us. There is no objective purpose to life, but there are things worth living for. We are born into this cruel, cruel world, and you might be tempted to become of the world, like Eren, justifying your fucked up self because you were born into it. Or you can conversely, like Armin does with Eren's terrible mistake, try and make the situation better. Try and make the best of a bad situation, and keep moving forward. You must fight, fight, fight against the bad situation. Understanding each other might indeed be a great tool to assist us of widely making the best of the shitty situation we're all in, but in the end, I think making the best out of a shitty situation is the thematic core of Attack on Titan and its ending. Ladies and gentlemen, that is my tentative video on the Attack on Titan ending, and largely the video that was going to be part 2 in our now dead ending trilogy. I hope it was worth the obnoxious wait. In the end, I don't think the ending will be as divisive for anime onlys. I think they'll end up liking it more than the manga contingent did, because the dramatic music and whatever will help get the point home, albeit less subtly. You gotta beat these fellas over the head with it sometimes, you know? Plus, I don't think the fighting is as bad internally with them. I see them being open to whatever the ending has to offer. The only thing I haven't really talked about in great detail in this video were a lot of the character moments, which I think are self-explanatorily great. Reiner and his mum hugging as she says she's glad that he isn't a warrior anymore. Come on, that's great stuff. Gabby suplexing Falco, that's great stuff. I hear people also like this Levi salute too. There are some things I still haven't figured out yet about the ending, and I enjoy thinking about, like the Ymir-Mikasa connection, and everything about Mikasa's choice or whatever. But hopefully with the fresh eyes of a reread, we can figure out everything. After all, it's not the work's fault when you haven't figured everything out yet. Not that there really is anything to figure out, but I'll save my reductive subjectivity talk for whatever video I repurpose my notes for the cancelled 3rd video in the ending trilogy to be. Stay tuned. Attack on Titan ending good. If you appreciate the videos, check out the Patreon. You can get your name in lights, like you saw at the beginning of the video. Also check out the 2nd channel, there's a bunch of Attack on Titan content over there, and the first part of the reread should be up right after this video goes out. Make sure you also subscribe to Ari and Mr. R's channels to catch the subsequent episodes. All links will be in the description. I'm still streaming, don't forget about Twitch. Also, I'm forever tweeting, so don't forget about Twitter either. Support links in the description below. Thanks.